He controlled a billion-dollar empire of cocaine and corpses, a man so volatile his own lieutenants whispered prayers before meetings. But the night Mateo Cruz walked into a dive bar with blood on his knuckles, the only thing that could disarm him was a bartender's simple act of kindness, and it would become the most dangerous obsession of his life. Mateo El Silencio Cruz wasn't just any kingpin. He was the architect of the Sinaloa cartel's most brutal expansion into the United States, a man diagnosed with the same volatile personality disorders that make violent offenders unpredictable and obsessive. And the woman who showed him mercy, Elena, was about to learn a terrifying lesson. In the cartel world, kindness isn't a virtue, it's a trigger. The rain in Houston that night didn't wash away the blood. It just made the streets shimmer like oil-slicked obsidian. Mateo Cruz watched it from the back of his armored Suburban, flexing the hand wrapped in a stained linen. He'd just come from a negotiation that had required a more direct form of punctuation. A rival distributor from the Gulf Cartel had made the fatal error of questioning Mateo's arithmetic. Now the man was cement, and Mateo had a deep gash across his knuckles from a shattered tequila bottle. "Don't go to the clinic," his head of security, a ex-Federals commander named Rojas, had grunted. "The Gulf has eyes there, clean it yourself." But the cut was deep, the linen was soaked through, and a specific, piercing throb was cutting through the adrenaline fog. Mateo was a man who controlled ports, politicians, and pipelines of cocaine worth over $300 million a year. Yet in that moment, he was undone by a simple biological need. The wound needed stitching. "Pull over there," Mateo ordered his driver, gesturing to a dimly lit hole-in-the-wall bar called The Last Call. It was a place that existed in the shadow of his own glittering towers, a relic of an old Houston he'd systematically bought and buried. The logic was cartel calculus. No one would look for El Silencio in a dive bar. No one would expect a kingpin to walk in alone. But here's the thing about cartel psychology. The research is clear. These individuals exhibit high neuroticism and low agreeableness, a recipe for impulsivity and emotional volatility. They are prone to obsessive fixation, seeing patterns and connections where none exist. For Mateo, a man who trusted no one and saw every interaction as a transaction of power, walking into that bar wasn't just a medical decision. It was a lapse in a lifetime of paranoid discipline. The bar was hushed, smelling of stale beer and lemon cleaner. A handful of regulars hunched over their drinks, their worlds small and contained. Behind the polished oak, a young woman was wiping down glasses. Elena, 26, putting herself through nursing school at the University of Houston, working 4 nights a week to cover tuition her scholarships didn't reach. Her life was a spreadsheet of shifts and study sessions, a world of fluorescent lights and student debt, completely alien to the nocturnal empire Mateo commanded. She looked up as he entered, her professional smile not quite reaching her tired eyes. Then she saw his hand. "Sir, you're bleeding pretty badly," she said, her nurse's training cutting through the bartender script. "It's nothing," Mateo replied, his voice a low rumble. "Just a glass, tequila. I'll take a whiskey, neat." Elena hesitated. She poured the drink, sliding it across to him, but her eyes didn't leave the makeshift bandage, now dripping a single fat drop of blood onto the pristine wood. "That's not going to stop on its own. You need stitches. I can call an ambulance." "No," Mateo said, too quickly, a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. "No authorities." An understanding passed between them, the kind that happens in places like The Last Call. Elena had seen her share of late-night patrons with questionable injuries. She made a decision, one rooted in the basic human decency her profession demanded. "Wait here." She disappeared into a back room and returned with a small green plastic box, a basic first aid kit. "Come around here to the sink," she said, unlocking a section of the bar. "The light's better." This was the breach of protocol, the moment of inexplicable kindness. Mateo, a man whose very touch was a command, obeyed. He sat on a stool as she turned on the water, her movements efficient and gentle. She unwrapped the linen, revealing the jagged cut. Mateo watched her face, expecting flinching, judgment, fear. He saw none. He saw focused concentration. "You were right," she said softly, cleaning the wound with antiseptic wipes. "This needs stitches, but I can butterfly it for now to get you to a proper doctor." She worked with steady hands, her touch clinical yet impossibly soft. It was a sensation so foreign to Matteo, it was disorienting. His world was built on violence, on the hard grips of handshakes that sealed fates, on the cold steel of weapons. This was different. This was care, offered freely, with no demand for payment or favor. "What's your name?" Matteo asked, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "Elena," she said, not looking up as she applied the sterile strips. "You should really get a tetanus shot, you know." Matteo almost smiled. In his world, tetanus was the least of his worries. He was quiet as she finished, wrapping his hand in a clean bandage from the kit. "There, that should hold. Please, go see someone tomorrow." He stood, pulling a roll of $100 bills from his pocket. He peeled off 5, placing them on the bar next to his untouched whiskey. "For your trouble." Elena shook her head, pushing the money back. "The bandage is from the kit. The trouble was just being a person. Keep it. Buy a less breakable glass next time." Matteo stared at her, the money lying between them like a challenge. No one refused his money. It was an insult, a power play. But looking at her earnest face, he realized it wasn't a play at all. It was purity. And for a psyche wired for obsession, purity is the most addictive substance on earth. He left the money, he nodded once, a gesture that felt clumsy, and he walked out into the rain, his bandaged hand held carefully at his side. In the car, Rojas looked back. "Problem, Hef?" "No," Matteo said, staring at the clean, white gauze. "No problem." But a switch had been flipped. The psychological pathways studies outline this. Violent offenders show higher reward sensitivity. For Matteo, the reward wasn't monetary. It was the dopamine hit of an unexpected, non-transactional kindness. His brain, accustomed to the brutal calculus of cartel life, didn't know how to categorize it, so it began to obsess. He spent the next 72 hours in a whirlwind of brutal business. A shipment was intercepted at the border. He ordered the execution of the trafficking crew and their families, a message written in blood. He finalized a deal with a corrupt state senator to secure a new port facility. Through it all, his mind kept circling back to the dim light of the bar, the smell of antiseptic, and the gentle pressure of her fingers. He sent Rojas to find out everything about her. Elena Reyes, nursing student, parents deceased, no siblings, no criminal ties, a life of quiet struggle, a textbook portrait of innocence. This only deepened the fixation. She was a blank canvas, untouched by the grime of his world. A week after the encounter, he returned to the last call. He didn't go in. He sat in his car across the street, watching her through the window as she laughed with a regular, as she wiped down the bar at closing time. He saw her walk to a beat-up Honda Civic, saw her check her back seat before getting in, a small, vulnerable gesture that sent a possessive thrill through him. She is being careful, he thought, but she is not safe. I could make her safe. This is where the obsession crystallized into a plan. It was no longer about gratitude. It was about ownership. In his mind, he had rewritten the narrative. Her kindness wasn't mere decency. It was a signal, a recognition of something in him that she alone could see. The cartel boss, who commanded fear from thousands, now craved validation from one. He began to orchestrate her safety from the shadows. When a local gang tried to extort protection money from the bar's owner, the gang's leader was found floating in the Buffalo Bayou the next morning. When Elena's car failed inspection, a mysterious benefactor paid for all the repairs at the garage, no questions asked. She lived in a bubble of inexplicable good fortune, unaware that the bubble was a gilded cage being constructed around her by a man who controlled a private army. The first major turning point came on a Tuesday night. Elena was closing alone. A man, drunk and belligerent, refused to leave. He grabbed her wrist when she tried to take his empty glass. "Let go of me," she said, her voice sharp with fear. At that exact moment, the front door opened. Not Rojas, Matteo himself. He was dressed in a simple black shirt and jeans, but his presence sucked the air from the room. He didn't speak. He just looked at the drunk man, his eyes flat and dead. The man, sensing a predator far more dangerous than himself, released Elena's wrist, muttered an apology, and stumbled out into the night. Elena let out a shaky breath, rubbing her wrist. "Thank you, I remember you, your hand." "It healed," Matteo said, holding it up. "Thanks to you." "You didn't have to do that." I had it under control, she lied, her pride surfacing through the fear. I know, he said, but I wanted to. He leaned against the bar, a casual pose that felt intensely deliberate. Let me buy you a drink, to say thank you properly. It was a test, a crossing of a line. Elena, exhausted, unnerved, and perhaps flattered by the attention of such an intensely compelling man, made a fateful choice. Okay, one drink, but I'm closing in 10 minutes. They talked, or rather Matteo asked questions, and Elena, disarmed by his focused attention, answered. She talked about school, about the stress of exams, about her dream of working in a pediatric ward. He listened as if she were describing state secrets. He told her he was in import-export, a boring business. He made her laugh with a self-deprecating joke. It was a masterful performance, the disarming facade the research warns about, the simple farmer, the harmless businessman. As she locked the door behind them, he said, "Let me drive you home. It's late." "I have my car," she said. "It's not safe," he replied, his voice leaving no room for argument, a statement that was both a warning and a promise. The following Saturday, a bouquet of white orchids arrived at her tiny apartment. No card, she knew. A chill went down her spine, this time mingled with a confusing thrill. Who was this man? She asked her boss, old Manny who owned the last call. Manny paled. "Elena, listen to me. That man, you don't want that kind of attention. You take those flowers and you throw them in the dumpster and you pray he loses interest." But it was too late. Matteo's obsession had become the central organizing principle of his dangerous life. He had started clearing his schedule, delegating crucial meetings to his increasingly concerned lieutenants. His second-in-command, a ruthless strategist named Viga, saw the distraction and recognized it for the catastrophic vulnerability it was. Jefe Viga said one night in Matteo's penthouse office, "This girl, she is a liability. The Gulf is getting bold. They hear you are preoccupied. They will use her." Matteo turned from the floor-to-ceiling window, his expression serene. "Let them try. She is under my protection." "Protection is a flag," Viga insisted. "It marks her as a weakness. If you care for her, distance is the only shield." Matteo's response was to pour 2 glasses of expensive añejo. He handed one to Viga. "You are a good friend, Viga, but you do not understand. She is not a weakness. She is the point." The stage was now set for catastrophe. On one side, Elena, living a life increasingly touched by invisible, menacing forces she couldn't comprehend. On the other, Matteo's Cartel empire, a delicate, bloody house of cards held together by his iron will, now trembling because his will was focused on a single woman. And in the shadows, rivals like the Gulf Cartel, sharks who had just caught the scent of blood in the water. The cliffhanger came 3 weeks after the orchids. Elena was studying at a 24-hour cafe when 2 well-dressed men approached her table. "Miss Reyes, our employer would like a word. He is a great admirer." Before she could refuse, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. The rear window rolled down. It wasn't Matteo. It was an older man with a scarred face and cold eyes, a face she would later learn belonged to Hector El Oso Mendoza, the regional boss of the Gulf Cartel. He smiled, a gesture devoid of warmth. "Get in, please. We need to talk about your new friend, Matteo, and how you are going to help us bring him down." Elena's blood turned to ice. Every instinct screamed to run, but the 2 men flanking her table had already closed off her escape. The smiling man in the SUV, Hector Mendoza, held up a phone. On the screen was a photograph, Matteo Cruz, standing over a body in a warehouse, a pistol in his hand. "You see my hija," Mendoza said. "Your gentle friend is the butcher of Houston, and you are going to help us put him in the ground." They didn't give her a choice. A hand on her elbow, firm but not painful, guided her into the plush interior of the SUV. The door closed with a muffled thud, sealing her in a capsule of leather and menace. Mendoza studied her. "You have a good heart," he said. "It's why you helped him, but that heart is now a liability, for you and for him." "What do you want from me?" Elena managed, her voice a whisper. "Information," Mendoza said simply. "His schedule, where he goes when he's not being El Silencio, who he meets. You get close. He is fascinated by you. We have watched. He sends you flowers. He drives by your home. This is a gift for us." I won't spy for you, Elena said, a spark of defiance cutting through the terror. Mendoza's smile vanished. It is not a request. He nodded to one of his men who handed Elena a tablet. On it was a live feed. It showed her apartment building, then the nursing school campus, then the last call bar. Red targeting reticles hovered over each location. We have shooters in place at all three. You refuse, we create a tragedy. A nursing student caught in a terrible gang shooting. So sad. The cruelty was so calculated, so absolute, it stole the air from her lungs. They would kill her and others and frame it as random violence. Mateo's world wasn't just dangerous, it was a contagion that poisoned everything it touched, and she was now patient zero. You have 1 week, Mendoza said. We will contact you. Do not speak of this to anyone, especially not to him. If he gets a whisper, the triggers are pulled. Understood. Elena could only nod, tears of rage and fear blurring her vision. They let her out 2 blocks away. She walked back to her car in a daze, the weight of the impossible choice crushing her. She was trapped between 2 cartels, a pawn in a war she never knew existed. But here, where Elena's character, forged in struggle and textbooks, began to assert itself, panic gave way to a cold, clinical analysis. She was in a deadly equation with 2 variables, Mateo, an obsessed, volatile protector, and Mendoza, a ruthless, logical extortionist. To survive, she needed to understand the full equation. She didn't go home. She went to the university library, to a computer terminal in a secluded corner. Her hands shook as she typed a name she'd only just learned, Mateo Cruz. The search results were a deluge of horror, news articles in Spanish and English, DEA press releases, federal indictments. Phrases leaped out: Sinaloa Cartel's U.S. operations chief, linked to over 200 disappearances. Prime suspect in the San Antonio mass grave case. There were photos too, not the handsome, intense man from the bar, but a stone-faced figure in a suit walking into a courthouse, surrounded by federal agents. A younger Mateo, lean and hungry, in a faded gang photo. The scale of it was incomprehensible. The man whose hand she had bandaged controlled a machine of death that spanned continents. The psychological profile from the research snapped into focus. High neuroticism, low agreeableness, obsessive fixation. The kindness she'd shown wasn't a human connection, it was a key that had unlocked a pathological obsession in a dangerous man. She hadn't helped a person, she had provoked a predator. Yet a darker, more terrifying question emerged. If Mateo was so powerful, so watchful, did he already know about Mendoza's approach? Was this all part of some test? The paranoia was instant and corrosive. She looked at every parked car, every passerby, seeing potential assassins or spies. She made her decision. She would play Mendoza's game, but not by his rules. She would feed the Gulf Cartel information, but it would be information designed to protect herself first, and maybe, just maybe, turn these 2 monsters against each other. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only move she had. The first contact came via a burner phone left in her unlocked car. A text: "Tomorrow night, where does he go?" Elena thought of Mateo's routines, pieced together from his visits and Rojas's watchful presence. She typed back, her heart hammering, "Villa Bella restaurant, Thursday nights, private room in back. He meets with a man named Vega, 8 p.m. It was true. It was also the most fortified, predictable meeting Mateo had. It was a test. She was handing Mendoza a target, but a target inside a lion's den. She needed to see how the Gulf would react, and more importantly, she needed Mateo to survive. If he fell, Mendoza had no use for her, and a loose end was a dead end. The next night, Elena was a wreck. She called in sick to the bar, too afraid to be anywhere near the coming storm. She watched the clock tick past 8. At 8:47, her burner phone buzzed. A single word: compromised. Then her personal phone rang, an unknown number. She answered, her breath catching. Elena, it was Mateo. His voice was calm, too calm, like the stillness before a tornado. "Did you have a nice evening?" "Yes, I was just studying," she stammered. "Good, study hard. The world needs good nurses." He paused. "You should know there was an incident tonight at a restaurant I sometimes visit. Some men from a rival company. They were unfortunately killed. It seems they were poorly informed." The message was clear, he knew. He had known they were coming, and he was telling her he had cleaned up the problem. The subtext was a warning and a display of power. I am protecting you, even from threats you bring to my doorstep. How did he know? The answer was immediate and chilling. He was watching Mendoza as closely as Mendoza was watching her. She was a tiny fish caught between two circling sharks, and they were both using her to gauge each other's movements. This changed everything. Mateo wasn't a blinded fool. His obsession hadn't made him weak. It had made him hypervigilant where she was concerned. She was both his vulnerability and his most sensitive early warning system. This realization brought a sliver of leverage, a terrifying one. Mendoza was furious. The next contact was a call. "You set us up, you stupid girl," a voice she didn't recognize hissed. "You asked for information, I gave it," Elena fired back, the fear morphing into a desperate courage. "You tried to hit him in his strongest place. That's not my fault. If you want to get to him, you need to think like him. You need a better plan." There was a long silence. Then a new voice came on the line. "Mendoza, you are clever," he said, sounding almost amused. "Perhaps you are more useful than I thought. New task. We need access, not to a restaurant, to his home, his inner sanctum." Elena's mind raced. Mateo had never invited her to his home. That was a line even he hadn't crossed. "I can't get you into his house." "You will," Mendoza said. "He wants you. Use that. Get an invitation. We need to plant a listening device. Just one. You will be given the equipment. A simple task. Or would you prefer we revisit the live feeds of your school?" The trap was closing. Getting into Mateo's home was an escalation she couldn't control. It was a direct violation of the last barrier, and if Mateo discovered it, his rage would be boundless. But refusal meant death. She decided to gamble everything on a single, audacious play. She called Mateo. She asked to see him, not at the bar, somewhere quiet. He agreed immediately. He sent Rojas to pick her up. The car didn't go to a restaurant or a club. It drove to a nondescript office building in the financial district. Rojas led her to a private elevator that went straight to the penthouse. It wasn't his home, it was his command center. The room was vast, all dark wood and cold glass. Wall-sized screens showed maps, financial tickers, and security feeds. Mateo stood by the window, overlooking the city he secretly ruled. He turned, and for the first time she saw him not as the mysterious stranger or the intimidating kingpin, but as a man utterly alone in a fortress of his own making. "You wanted to talk," he said. Elena took a deep breath, the words she had rehearsed tumbling out. "I need to tell you something, and I need your help. Men from the Gulf Cartel approached me, they threatened me, they want me to spy on you, they showed me who you are." She watched his face. There was no surprise, only a slow, simmering anger that made the air in the room feel thin. "I know," he said softly. "I have known since the moment they pulled up next to you. My people have been monitoring El Oso for weeks." "Then why didn't you do something?" she asked, confused. "I was waiting," he said, stepping closer. "I was waiting to see what you would do. You gave them the restaurant, a test, you passed." A cold realization dawned on her. The entire situation, the approach, the threat, her frightened response, had been a live-fire exercise orchestrated by Mateo. He had let it happen to observe her loyalty. The depth of his calculation was horrifying. "And now," she whispered. "Now you come to me," he said. "You tell me the truth. This is good. This means you understand where your safety lies." He reached out, his fingers gently brushing her cheek. It was a possessive gesture, but for the first time it didn't feel entirely threatening. It felt like a claim. "You are under my protection, Elena, fully. Tell me what they want next." Her heart was a drum against her ribs. This was the moment. She could tell him the full truth about the device, about the plan to infiltrate his home. That would be the safe play, aligning completely with him. But safety with Mateo was an illusion. It was permanent, gilded captivity. She needed chaos. She needed the two cartels to cripple each other. "They want me to get into your house," she said, sticking to a half-truth, "to plant a listening device. They gave me a deadline." Mateo's eyes darkened with a predatory gleam. "Perfect," he murmured. "This is perfect. You will do it." Elena stared at him, stunned. What? You will take their device, and you will plant it exactly where they tell you. But in my home, Elena, nothing happens without my consent. We will give them a channel that plays only what I want them to hear. We will feed them a story so compelling, so urgent, that El Oso will move his entire operation into a trap of my choosing. The pivot was breathtaking. Elena had walked in fearing for her life, and now she was being recruited as an active asset in a cartel war. Mateo wasn't just protecting her, he was weaponizing her. His obsession had found its ultimate expression. He would use the woman he coveted as the bait and the switchblade in his most important strategic play. Do you understand? He asked, his gaze locking onto hers. You and I, we do this together. We end this threat. And when it is done, you will have nothing to fear, ever again. It was a devil's bargain. To survive, she had to fully enter his world, to become a co-conspirator in its violence. The innocent act of bandaging a wound had led her here, to a penthouse war room, making a pact with a devil. She thought of the targets on her school, her home. She thought of Mendoza's cold smile. She had no choice. I understand, she said, her voice steady now, devoid of emotion. Good, Mateo smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. Welcome to the real world, Elena. The next 48 hours were a crash course in cartel espionage. A tech specialist from Mateo's organization, a quiet man introduced only as the engineer, modified the Gulf Cartel's listening device. He explained it would now broadcast on a loop a pre-recorded digital file, while a separate, hidden device would capture the actual room audio for Mateo. The plan was set. Elena was to receive the final go-ahead from Mendoza. She would be given a keycard and an access code for a service entrance to Mateo's riverfront mansion, obtained through a Gulf Cartel mole on his domestic staff. She would plant the bug in his study, inside a hollowed-out edition of Dante's Inferno on his shelf, a piece of intelligence Mendoza was particularly proud of. The night of the operation, Elena was a ghost of herself. Dressed in black, she was driven to a drop-off point near Mateo's estate by Rojas. Remember, Rojas grunted, walk the path we mapped. The external cameras will be blind for a 12-minute window. You have 10, do not look at the security post. The scale of Mateo's compound was staggering, a fortress hidden behind manicured lawns and high walls. She used the keycard at the service gate. It clicked open. Her every nerve was screaming. She moved through the shadows, a phantom in the enemy's camp, except the enemy was now her patron. She found the study, a room of dark leather and the faint smell of cigar smoke. Her eyes found the book. Her hands, steady when stitching a wound, trembled as she retrieved the bug from her pocket and slipped it into the cavity. It clicked into place. A green LED light blinked once, then went dark. It was done. As she turned to leave, her eye caught a photograph on the desk. It was a picture of Mateo, much younger, with his arm around a smiling woman and a small boy. A family, a life before the crown. The humanity of it was a shock, a dissonant chord in the symphony of terror. She fled. Back in the safe car with Rojas, she exhaled a shuddering breath. It is done, she said. Rojas just nodded, speaking into his wrist mic. The package is delivered. Now the waiting began. The engineered audio feed would begin transmitting in 6 hours. It contained a fabricated conversation, Mateo and Vega arguing about a massive, vulnerable cash shipment, $8 million in unmarked bills, being moved to a supposedly secure counting house in 3 nights' time. It was the perfect bait, a huge score, internal discord, and a specific time and place. Elena was taken not home, but back to the penthouse. Mateo was waiting, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked energized, alive. You did well, he said. Now we watch. On a monitor, a map showed the signal from the bug pulsing. Another screen showed the Gulf Cartel's known safe houses. Activity was spiking. Calls were being made. El Oso was taking the bait. But here's the thing about traps. They can spring on the trapper. As Elena sat in that silent room, watching the digital ghosts of a coming battle, a new and terrible thought occurred to her. What if Mendoza wasn't the only one listening? What if he suspected a double cross? What if the real target of this entire operation wasn't the cash shipment, but something else entirely? Her burner phone, which she had kept, buzzed in her pocket. a text from an unknown number, different from Mendoza's chain. It read, "The book is a good choice. Dante knew all about betrayal. Ask your new friend who really killed his family. The answer might change your mind about whose side you're on." The message was a bolt from the blue. It implied a deeper history, a secret within Matteo's past, and it meant that someone else, a third player, was watching her with knowledge so intimate it froze her blood. The game had just doubled in size, and Elena was no longer a pawn. She was the contested square on a board where every piece was a knife. The anonymous text burned in Elena's pocket. It was a pebble thrown into the still pond of Matteo's narrative, sending out ripples that distorted everything. Who was this third player, and what did they know about Matteo's family that could be weaponized? Elena looked at Matteo, who was watching the screens with the focus of a grandmaster, completely unaware of the fissure that had just opened beneath his feet. She had a choice: swallow the secret and remain his weapon, or ask the question and risk detonating the very man who was her only shield. She stayed silent. For now, the operation was in motion, a ticking clock that couldn't be stopped. For the next 36 hours, Elena lived in a state of suspended animation, housed in a secure suite within Matteo's office building. She was a passenger in a speeding car, watching the landscape of her life blur into violence. The fabricated audio feed worked perfectly. Matteo's tech team monitored the Gulf Cartel's communications. They heard Mendoza's lieutenants confirming the time and location of the fake cash shipment. They heard the mobilization of 24 heavily armed men. El Oso was committing a significant portion of his Houston muscle to the ambush, exactly as Matteo had hoped. But the anonymous text had planted a seed of corrosive doubt. Elena began to see cracks in Matteo's armor of control. He was micromanaging the trap, barking orders, his obsession with perfection veering into paranoia. He snapped at Vega over a minor detail. He questioned Rojas's positioning of a perimeter team. This wasn't just about business. This was personal. This was about eliminating a rival who had dared to touch what was his. The psychological profile was manifesting, a volatile mix of high neuroticism and obsessive focus, a pressure cooker waiting to blow. The night of the ambush arrived. Elena was in the command center, forced to watch the operation on a bank of monitors. It was a live-streamed nightmare. Thermal imaging showed Mendoza's men converging on a nondescript warehouse in the industrial district. Matteo's forces, hidden in the surrounding buildings and rooftops, were invisible ghosts. "Wait for them all to enter the kill zone," Matteo murmured into his headset, his voice chillingly calm. "Let them taste the prize." On screen, the Gulf Cartel enforcers breached the warehouse doors. They found stacks of dummy cash boxes in the center of the concrete floor. For a split second, there was confusion. Then the lights went out, and the world dissolved into chaos. The screens switched to gun camera footage from Matteo's squad. Muzzles flashed in the dark. Silhouettes dropped. The sound, even through speakers, was a deafening staccato of automatic gunfire and screams. It was a slaughter. Mendoza's men were caught in a crossfire from elevated positions, cut down before they could properly return fire. In 10 minutes, it was over. The warehouse floor was littered with bodies. Matteo's teams moved in, confirming kills. "Target not present," a voice crackled over the comms. "Repeat, primary target not on site. El Oso is not here." Matteo's fist slammed onto the console. He was supposed to be here. He never misses a score this big. Elena felt a cold dread. Mendoza was smarter than they'd thought. He'd sent his men into the meat grinder, but he'd stayed away. The trap had sprung, but it hadn't caught the lion. It had only made him more dangerous. Then the situation got worse, far worse. Another screen lit up with an alert. It was a feed from the security cameras at Matteo's riverfront mansion, the very home Elena had infiltrated. The screens showed dark, silent rooms. Then a figure appeared in the study, not an intruder. It was the engineer, Matteo's own tech specialist, the man who had modified the bug. He wasn't checking the device. He was removing it. He carefully took the hollowed-out book, extracted the Gulf Cartel's original bug, and placed a new, identical-looking device inside. Then he took the original and slipped it into his pocket. "What is he doing?" Elena breathed. the words escaping before she could stop them. Mateo whirled around, his eyes locking on the monitor. His face, a mask of rage seconds before, went blank with shock. Then it transformed into something truly terrifying, a pure, undiluted understanding of betrayal from within his innermost circle. Rojas, Mateo said, his voice a deadly whisper. "Detain the engineer. Now bring him to me." But it was too late. As Rojas's team moved on the command channel, the engineer in the study looked directly up at the hidden camera, a camera he himself had installed. He smiled, gave a small, mocking wave, and then the feed from the mansion went black. All of it. Every camera, every sensor, every light. The entire compound had just been digitally amputated from Mateo's network. "He played us," Vega said, his voice hollow, "the entire time. He was their mole, not on the staff, in your tech core." Mateo stood utterly still. The revelation was a physical blow. The bug Elena planted was never meant to feed Mendoza false information. It was a carrier. The engineer had used her to deliver a clean, undetectable piece of hardware into Mateo's sanctum, a device that, once in place, allowed him to upload a virus that gave the Gulf Cartel complete access to Mateo's home network. They hadn't wanted to listen. They wanted to see. To access his computers, his files, his true financial ledgers, his blackmail portfolios on politicians. The trap for the cash shipment was a distraction. A bloody, violent distraction to keep Mateo's eyes and forces looking one way while the real theft happened in his own home. While Elena had been watching men die in a warehouse, Mendoza's hackers were likely pillaging a decade of secrets. Mateo turned to Elena. The look in his eyes was no longer possessive or even angry. It was evaluating, cold, and distant. "Did you know?" "No," she said, the truth clear in her panicked voice. "I swear, Mateo, he gave me the device. I planted what he gave me." Mateo held her gaze for a long, agonizing moment. Then he gave a single, sharp nod. "I believe you, because if you were working with him, you would be gone by now. He saw you as a useful idiot, a patsy." The insult should have strung, but it was a relief. She was still alive, but the foundation had collapsed. Mateo's fortress had been breached from the inside. His paranoia, once a tool, was now his reality. He looked at Vega, at Rojas, at every person in the room with new, suspicious eyes. "We need to move," Vega said urgently. "If they have the data we think they have, they can compromise our entire operation. Police, DEA, rivals, they'll have a roadmap." Mateo's phone rang. A private number. He answered, putting it on speaker. The voice that filled the room was Hector Mendoza's, dripping with smug satisfaction. "Mateo, my old friend, thank you for the hospitality. Your home security system is very informative. I especially enjoyed the personal files, the family photographs. It's always good to remember where we come from, no." Mateo's knuckles were white around the phone. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted," Mendoza said. "Your territory, your roots, your crown. But now I don't have to fight you for it. I just have to give what I found to the right people. The DEA would pay a fortune for your ledgers. The Russians would love to know how you've been shortchanging them. Or you can walk away, take your little nurse and disappear. The empire is mine now." It was checkmate. Mendoza held the keys to the kingdom. Mateo was silent, his mind racing through options that were evaporating by the second. It was in this moment of absolute crisis that the anonymous text in Elena's pocket gained irresistible gravity. Who really killed his family? This was her moment, the only card she had left to play. "Mateo," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "The night I planted the bug in your study, I saw a photograph, your family." Mateo's head snapped toward her, a warning flash in his eyes. "Do not." "Who were they?" Elena pressed, the gambit laid bare. "What happened to them?" Vega looked down. Rojas shifted uncomfortably. It was a wound so deep, so central to the myth of El Silencio, that no one ever spoke of it. Mateo's jaw clenched. A long, heavy silence stretched out. The phone was still in his hand, Mendoza waiting on the line, listening to this intimate unraveling. "My wife, Ana," Mateo said, the words dragged from a place of profound pain. "My son, Miguel, They were killed 7 years ago, a home invasion. It was why I left Sinaloa, why I built what I built here, to never be that weak again." Mendoza couldn't resist. He chimed in from the speaker, his voice a poisonous sneer. "A home invasion? Is that the story you tell yourself, Mateo? How convenient." "What are you saying?" Mateo growled. "I'm saying," Mendoza drawled, "that the men who killed your family weren't random thieves. They were sent by someone who thought you were getting too ambitious back in Culiacan, someone who wanted your position and knew your heart was your only real weakness." The air left the room. The anonymous text had been a prelude to this. Mendoza wasn't just revealing a secret, he was surgically removing the foundational trauma of Mateo's life and revealing it as a betrayal. "Who?" Mateo's voice was barely audible. "Your beloved mentor," Mendoza said with theatrical pity. "El Padrino himself, Don Ignacio Rivera. He gave the order. He thought you were a stray dog getting ideas above your station. He never imagined the dog would become a wolf and eat the whole pack." The revelation was catastrophic. Don Ignacio was the legendary, now-retired head of the Sinaloa Cartel's Pacific operations, Mateo's patron, the man he credited with his rise, the man whose portrait hung in his office. To learn that the same hand that lifted him up had also smashed his heart to pieces, it was a psychological atom bomb. Mateo dropped the phone. He didn't scream. He didn't move. He simply shattered internally. Every principle, every loyalty, every ounce of meaning he had constructed his brutal empire upon was revealed as ash. The obsessive personality, the volatile neuroticism, it had all been built on this foundational lie. And now the foundation was gone. Elena watched the transformation. The powerful kingpin vanished. In his place stood a hollow man, vibrating with a grief so fresh and so profound it was indistinguishable from madness. Mendoza's voice, tinny from the fallen phone, continued. "So you see, Mateo, we are not so different. We have both been betrayed by the old monsters. Join me. Help me finish them. Together we can." Mateo's foot came down on the phone, crushing it to silence. He looked at Vega. "Contact our teams at the warehouse. Have them retrieve 5 of the least damaged bodies." "Sir?" Vega asked, confused. "We're not running," Mateo said, a new frightening light in his eyes. "We're attacking, but not Mendoza, not yet." He turned his gaze, now sharp and crystalline with purpose, to Elena. "You asked me what happened to my family. Now you know, and you brought me the key that unlocked the truth." He walked to a secure wall safe, hidden behind a painting. He punched in a code and retrieved a single, weathered file folder. He threw it on the console. "Mendoza has my business secrets. Fine, let him have them. They are the past. This," he said, tapping the folder, "is the future. This is the dossier I have been building on Don Ignacio Rivera for 5 years. Every sin, every murder, every hidden bank account. I was saving it for the perfect moment of betrayal. I thought I was being patient. I was just being a coward." He opened the folder. Inside were photos, bank records, flight manifests, and one name, a co-signer on several shell companies, kept appearing: Hector Mendoza. "Wait," Elena said, peering at the documents. "Mendoza's name is here, from years ago." "Of course it is," Mateo said, a grim smile touching his lips. "Mendoza was Don Ignacio's bagman back then, his trusted errand boy. He didn't just know about the order to kill my family, he helped facilitate it. He provided the weapons, the clean car, the safe house for the shooters." The final, devastating twist. Mendoza hadn't just revealed Mateo's original trauma out of spite. He had inadvertently connected himself to it. He was not just a business rival, he was a co-conspirator in the murder of Mateo's wife and child. The game had just ended. This was no longer a war for territory. It was a blood feud sanctified by the deepest possible personal betrayal. And Elena, by asking her question, had lit the fuse. "So here is the new plan," Mateo said, his voice now terrifyingly calm, the calm of absolute resolution. "We give Mendoza exactly what he wants. We give him to Don Ignacio." He explained they would use the 5 bodies from the warehouse, Gulf Cartel soldiers, and stage a scene. They would plant falsified evidence on the bodies suggesting Mendoza was preparing to move against the old guard in Sinaloa, using the data he stole from Mateo to blackmail Don Ignacio himself. Then they would leak the location of the bodies to a channel they knew would reach Don Ignacio's people. "We let the old monster clean up our mess for us," Mateo said. "And when he's done, when Mendoza is gone, we move on Don Ignacio with everything we have left. We burn his world to the ground." It was a plan of breathtaking audacity and risk. It required perfect timing, brutal execution, and relied on the predictable paranoia of an even bigger kingpin. It also required Elena to stay deep in the field. She was the only one Mendoza might still believe he controlled, the only one who could help sell the narrative. "You want me to go back to him," she stated, not asked. Mateo looked at her, and for the first time there was no obsession in his gaze, only a stark, brutal respect. "You are the only variable he cannot calculate. He thinks you are scared and malleable. You will go to him. You will tell him Mateo Cruz is broken, that he's fleeing the city with what little he can carry. You will beg for Mendoza's protection. And you will give him one final, crucial piece of false information: the location where Mateo is supposedly hiding before his escape flight. The location where Don Ignacio's men will be waiting for Hector Mendoza." Elena understood. She was to be the final piece of bait in a trap that spanned 2 cartels and a decade of betrayal. The innocent bartender was now the central actor in a play of continental vengeance. She looked at the hollow, vengeful man Mateo had become, and at the folder full of ghosts. She thought of the picture of his family. She nodded. "I'll do it." The plan was a house of cards built on a foundation of vengeance. Elena would walk into the serpent's den one last time, selling a performance of terrified loyalty to the man who helped murder a family. Mateo would vanish, becoming a ghost to lure 2 predators into the same kill box. And at the center of it all was the simple, devastating truth: the kindness that started this war was now the instrument that would end it. Elena's preparation was clinical. Under Viga's direction, she was given a script, a backstory of panic and desperation. She was to contact Mendoza through the dead-drop burner phone, claim she had escaped Mateo's compound in the chaos after the warehouse ambush, and beg for extraction. The key details she would offer: Mateo was holed up at a decommissioned Coast Guard station on the Galveston coast, waiting for a midnight speedboat to take him and a small crew to a freighter bound for Colombia. The location was real, chosen for its isolation and defensive sightlines. It was also, according to Mateo's dossier, a property secretly owned by a shell company linked to Don Ignacio Rivera, a perfect place for the old kingpin to stage an ambush of his own. Elena made the call from a payphone near the port, her voice convincingly ragged with fear. Mendoza took the bait. He was triumphant, convinced his digital heist and psychological warfare had broken his rival completely. He promised Elena safety, a new identity, a reward. She heard the greed in his voice, the belief that he had won. Meanwhile, Mateo executed his disappearing act. His penthouse command center was stripped and scrubbed. His visible assets began a complex, pre-planned financial dance designed to look like a frantic liquidation. To the outside world, El Silencio was crumbling. His lieutenants spread the demoralizing word: the boss was cutting his losses and running. But Mateo wasn't running. He was hunting. With a skeleton crew of only Rojas and 4 men whose loyalty was beyond question, men whose families he had saved from Don Ignacio's brutality years prior, he moved to a nondescript fishing cabin up the coast. From there, they would monitor the trap. The stage was set for a triple cross of Shakespearean proportions. Elena was delivered to a Gulf Cartel safe house where Mendoza greeted her like a conquering hero. "You did well," he said, pouring her a drink she didn't touch. He was already packing, preparing to personally lead the strike on the Coast Guard station. He wanted to look Mateo in the eye before he killed him. It was the ego-driven mistake Mateo had counted on. As Mendoza's convoy of black SUVs rolled toward Galveston that night, Mateo's team watched via drone feed. At the same time, through a separate, encrypted channel maintained by a trusted contact in Sinaloa, Mateo sent the final, triggering message to Don Ignacio's security chief. It contained the coordinates of the Coast Guard station and a line of text: Mendoza comes to steal your legacy tonight. He brings the evidence to bury you." The trap was sprung. Don Ignacio's response was swift and terrifying. He didn't send a local crew. He dispatched a asterisk Sicario unit from Mexico, specialists in brutal, decisive erasures. They arrived by sea, black inflatables cutting through the moonless waves, reaching the station just as Mendoza's vehicles were pulling up to the chain-link fence. Elena watched the climax from a live audio feed in the safe house, where Mendoza had left 2 guards. She heard it all through a comms unit Mendoza had left open. The sudden roar of unexpected gunfire, not from the station, but from the shoreline. Mendoza's confused shouts. The panicked screams of his men caught in a crossfire between the station's defenses, manned by Don Ignacio's men who'd arrived first, and the flanking attack from the sea. It was a turkey shoot. The audio dissolved into a nightmare of overlapping chaos. Automatic weapons fire, explosions, orders screamed in Spanish. Then Mendoza's voice, close to the mic, raw with betrayal and fear. "Rivera, you old bastard." It was him. "Mateo set this up." A calm, elderly voice replied close by, "I know, Hector. I always knew you were a disloyal dog. But to try to use my own property to kill me, that is arrogance." A single gunshot echoed, then silence on the channel. Hector El Oso Mendoza was dead, executed by the very monster he'd served and betrayed. In the fishing cabin, Mateo watched the thermal drone imagery as the heat signatures winked out one by one. His face was stone. There was no triumph, only a cold satisfaction. One ghost was laid to rest. But the plan had a second, more dangerous phase. Don Ignacio was still alive, and his elite Sicario team was now bloodied but intact. They would sweep the area, find evidence, and report back. Mateo needed that report to be his final gift to the old man. Using the access credentials stolen during the earlier cyber attack on his own home, credentials his tech team had partially recovered, Chinese letter engineered, Mateo's hacker-initiated Phase 2. They flooded Don Ignacio's private servers with the asterisk real data from Mateo's stolen files, but with a crucial twist. Intermixed were fabricated financial records showing massive, recent wire transfers from Don Ignacio's accounts to a DEA evidence locker, and encrypted emails that suggested the old kingpin was turning informant to secure immunity for his grandchildren. It was the perfect poison. In the paranoid, hierarchical world of the Sinaloa cartel, even the hint of cooperation with authorities is a death sentence. The data was designed to be discovered by Don Ignacio's own number 2, a ruthless, ambitious underboss named El Lobo, who coveted the old man's throne. The fallout was instant and volcanic. Within 12 hours of the Galveston massacre, news trickled back through intelligence channels. A violent internal purge had begun at Don Ignacio's ranch in the mountains of Sinaloa. El Lobo had moved, using the planted evidence as his justification. Don Ignacio Rivera, the man who ordered the death of a family to maintain power, was reportedly executed by his own protege in his own courtyard. The empire Mateo had once revered was now consuming itself in civil war, its leadership too distracted to pursue him. Mateo Cruz had won. He had annihilated his 2 greatest enemies without firing a single public shot. The Gulf Cartel's Houston operation was headless and in disarray, ripe for absorption by Mateo's now consolidated forces. The Sinaloa Old Guard was shattered. In the brutal calculus of cartel warfare, it was a masterpiece. But what of Elena? She was still in the Gulf safe house with 2 guards. When the audio feed from Galveston went silent, the guards grew nervous. They argued about what to do with her. One wanted to kill her and flee. The other, younger and more pragmatic, saw her as a potential bargaining chip. Elena didn't wait for their decision. Using a trick she'd learned in a self-defense class, she feigned a panic attack, crumpling to the floor. As the younger guard knelt to check on her, she drove a concealed ceramic shard, taken from a broken plate at dinner, into his neck. The older guard raised his weapon, but a single, silenced shot from the window took him in the temple. The window had been unlocked by Elena hours earlier. Rojas stepped inside, lowering his rifle. He gave her a curt nod. The extraction was always the backup plan, Mateo had never truly left her unprotected. She was taken to the fishing cabin. Mateo was there, standing on the porch overlooking the dark gulf. He turned as she approached. The obsession that had once burned in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, weary emptiness. The vengeance was complete, but it had not brought back his family. It had not filled the void. "It's done," he said. Elena looked at him, this man who had upended her life, who had drawn her into a world of unimaginable violence, and who had, in his own twisted way, kept his word to protect her. She felt no love, no attachment, but she felt a strange, resonant understanding. They were both survivors of the same storm, though they had entered it from different sides. "What now?" she asked. "For me." Mateo handed her a thick envelope. Inside was a Canadian passport with her photo and a new name, Elena Silva, a bank card linked to an account with $2 million, a one-way ticket to Vancouver leaving that morning, and a single, handwritten note: "The debt is paid, do not look back." He was giving her the escape she had always wanted, the clean slate, but as she held the envelope, she realized the slate could never be clean. She had killed a man, she had conspired in dozens more deaths. She had learned to think like them, to manipulate and survive in their world. The innocent bartender was gone forever. There was one final surprise, one last twist in the narrative. As she turned to leave, Rojas spoke. The anonymous text, the one that asked about his family, we traced it. It was sent from a phone purchased by the engineer Mendoza's mole. It was part of their psychological play, meant to destabilize Mateo further. But Rojas continued, the information about Don Ignacio's order, that was real. We verified it through separate channels after the fact. The engineer didn't know he was giving us the key to our own revenge. The irony was perfect. Mendoza's attempt to break Mateo had instead handed him the moral justification and the strategic blueprint to destroy them both. The final, surprising detail was that in this entire saga of lies and manipulation, the most devastating truth had been delivered by the enemy. Elena got into the car with Rojas, who would take her to the airport. She didn't look back at Mateo. As they drove, the first light of dawn began to bleed over the Texas horizon, turning the Gulf from black to gray. In Vancouver, she used the money to finish her nursing degree under her new name. She specialized in trauma care. She never spoke of Houston, of Mateo, of the blood on her hands. But sometimes, in the quiet of the ER, when she treated a patient with a violent injury, her hands would be steady, her focus absolute. She was an excellent nurse, the best in her unit. And in Houston, Mateo Cruz El Silencio rebuilt his empire on the ashes of his enemies. He was more powerful, more secure than ever, but he never went to the last call again. He never sent flowers. The obsession had run its course, exorcised through the fire of vengeance. The volatile neuroticism that once fixated on a moment of kindness was now channeled into a cold, impenetrable control. He ruled alone, a king in a silent castle. The photograph of his family, the only relic of the man he had been before the world, and a simple act of bandaging a wound had remade him. The central promise of the hook was resolved. A bartender's kindness did trigger a dangerous obsession. It became the catalyst that unraveled a cartel kingpin's life, exposed a decades-old betrayal, and ignited a war that reshaped the criminal landscape. It proved the research that in the psyche of a violent offender, an unexpected act of decency can become a focal point for pathological fixation, with consequences that ripple outward in waves of unpredictable violence and calculated revenge. Elena's act of mercy was neither her salvation nor her damnation. It was the spark. And from that spark, two people were forged anew, one into a survivor carrying invisible scars, the other into a legend solidified by a grief finally, brutally answered. The storm had passed, leaving a cleared but haunted landscape in its wake. So what does this story of a cartel kingpin and a bartender truly reveal? Beyond the violence and the twists, it exposes a fundamental rule of the brutal ecosystems these men create. Humanity is the ultimate disruptor. In a world governed by paranoia and transactional cruelty, a genuine, unasked-for act of kindness doesn't register as decency. It registers as a profound anomaly, a glitch in the system that a volatile, obsessive mind cannot help but try to possess, control, or ultimately destroy. Elena's story is a case study in unintended consequences. She acted on the basic human instinct to help someone who was hurt. She had no map for the labyrinth she was about to enter, a world where, as the research shows, cartels function like adaptive, ruthless corporations, and their leaders are often psychologically wired for high-risk obsession. Her moment of mercy became a pebble that started an avalanche, burying some monsters and forever altering her own life. Mateo's arc is darker still. It shows how a pathological fixation can be harnessed, how love and grief and rage can all fuel the same destructive engine. His obsession saved Elena's life even as it endangered it, and his vengeance consumed his enemies but left him ruling a kingdom of ghosts. He won his war, but at the cost of erasing the last remnants of the man who might have deserved that kindness in the first place. This leaves us with lingering questions that have no easy answers. Did Elena make the right choice in the end by playing the game, by becoming a participant in the violence to survive it? Could she have walked away sooner, or was she trapped from the moment Mendoza's SUV pulled to the curb? And what of Mateo's final act, giving her freedom and a fortune? Was it a payoff, a quiet thank you, or simply the most efficient way to tie up his last loose end? The real world of cartels continues, of course. The Sinaloa cartel remains the world's most powerful, adapting and evolving. The death toll in Mexico's long war continues to climb past 460,000. New kingpins rise with the same psychological predispositions, the same capacity for charm and brutality. The cycle repeats. But stories like this remind us that within these vast, impersonal machines of crime, the human element, a chance encounter, a buried trauma, a single decision, can still alter the course of events. It reminds us that power is not just about control of territory or product, but about the control of narrative, of truth, and of the fragile hearts caught in the crossfire. What did you think? Was Elena's final transformation into a survivor who could take a life justified, or did she lose a part of herself she can never get back? Did Mateo and Mendoza ultimately get what they deserved? Let us know your perspective in the comments below. We read every one. If this deep dive into the psychology and consequences of a single act of kindness captivated you, please hit the like button. It truly helps us bring you more content like this. Share this story with a friend who loves intricate tales of crime and consequence. And for more documentaries that unravel the hidden rules of the world's most dangerous games, make sure to subscribe. Thank you for listening.